This presentation is a best practices presentation. What we're going to talk about is the user access model, leveraging equipment and resources for sustainability and student industry partnerships. I'm Peter Kazarnov. I'm the Managing Director of SHINE, a nanotechnology education center located in Seattle, Washington. SHINE serves Washington, Oregon, and Idaho to support technician training for the nanotechnology industry. Joining me is also Christine Schroeder. Christine is the lab technician in SHINE's nanotechnology lab, as well as Brian Rusi, SHINE's program specialist. So this presentation is going to contain a number of different pieces. First is the rationale behind this work, as well as some definitions, why start a user access facility. Then I'll dive right into the meat of the presentation, which are the facility agreements. What type of documentation do you need to create in order to set a user facility up? Then we'll talk about the billing and accounts procedure, if you want to adopt this at your institution and how we do it. We'll talk about the pricing structure, which is really key to our user facility compared to other user facilities across the country. Then we'll talk about the results, how much revenue have we brought in using this model, and what type of partnerships have we formed. And then we have a small case study with an individual company and talk about the success that we've brought to both students and our centers using the user facility model. So technician education programs need to contain connections between students and industry. And it doesn't matter what type of technician training program you are, this is essential that you have a connection between your students and where they're ultimately going to work. Technician education programs, in particular nano, micro, biotech, laser tech programs, also have specialized equipment that aren't often used in other parts of the community and technical colleges of which that equipment is housed. And often this equipment is underutilized. If you have specialized biotech, laser, nanotechnology equipment, and one of the courses that uses that equipment isn't running that particular semester, that particular quarter, often that equipment lays dormant and it's just sitting in the lab until the course starts the next quarter, the next semester. And in addition, sustainability is always going to be a challenge for every technician education program. Whether it's current sustainability or whether the technician training program is federally funded, like ours is through an ATE grant. So this is the rationale that we use to set up a user access facility. So user access sites are sites which house specialized equipment which can be rented by the hour by industry or outside users. Probably most of you are familiar with these three institutions, the University of Washington, Stanford, and the University of Michigan. These three institutions have user access facilities. These user access facilities include clean room facilities, include electron microscopes and transmission electron microscopes. All of this equipment is incredibly expensive, and the universities rent out time on the equipment so that outside users, such as startup companies, mid-sized and large companies, as well as academic users, can come in and use the clean room, use the electron microscopes, use the scanning electron microscopes. It's a way to leverage these facilities and a way to increase partnerships. And all of the advanced clean room facilities at these major Tier 1 four-year institutions have these user facility agreements in place. So as a community college, we thought, why can't we have the same type of agreement in place? We don't have a Class 10 clean room on our campus, but we do have specialized equipment that can be used by industry, and it's the exact same equipment that our students will go on to use in their jobs. So why not set up a similar model that Stanford has and generate revenue and partnerships? So in order to set up a user facility agreement, in order to have instruments which are housed at your community or technical college and have them be able to be used and rented by the hour by industry partners or educational partners, you need a couple pieces of official documentation in place to make this happen. This type of documentation is usually not something which is at a community college already, because usually these pieces of specialized equipment aren't set up for outside users to come in and rent by the hour. So the first piece of documentation is a facilities agreement, and Christine passed these out to you guys earlier. So the facilities agreement is the legal agreement between the community and technical college and the user regarding use of the instrument. And we ran this document past the legal team at our community college, as well as drafted this document based upon the user agreements at places like Stanford, MIT, and the University of Michigan. It's basically a legal agreement that states that the user will use the equipment, liability is on the user, as well as they will abide by the pricing structure and the billing structure that we've set up. The second piece of documentation is individual IP agreement. IP stands for intellectual property. Originally, we didn't have an IP agreement as part of our user facility, but from feedback from our National Visiting Committee, as well as some feedback from the industry users, this was important enough to have a separate piece of paper for. The startup companies that come in and use our equipment by the hour, their real currency is their intellectual property. Not actually the capital or the money that the company has. And it is of utmost importance to the companies that use our facility that their intellectual property maintains private and is maintained within their company and does not become part of the college's property. So any of the images that are obtained on the microscopes, any of the data that's obtained with any of the instruments, those are property of the individual user and of the company. Those are not property of our program or property of the community college. And up front, that's something that you need to be very clear with the companies. If their information cannot be kept proprietary, they will probably not use any of your instruments. The third piece of documentation is just the pricing structure. How much are you going to charge for users to come into your facility and rent your equipment and use it by the hour? We have a 3-tiered pricing structure based on the type of user and based on who's actually going to run and use the equipment. So Brian's going to discuss billing and accounts, and within our community college, how we set this up.
Thanks, Peter. Like Peter said, I'm going to quickly talk about setting up the accounts to be able to take in dollars once you have your equipment in place. At our school, we kind of identified 2 different ways to do it. You can go through your institution's foundation, and that way you're kind of accepting donations. The advantage of doing it that way is you have a little more flexibility of once you have the money, later on trying to spend it. The other option is to have your business office set you up a budget number, and you can take dollars in that way. But then ultimately, the business office kind of has a little more control over that money. So we went with through our foundation, and it's worked very well. So once you have that in place, then you can start looking at connecting with potential users, explaining to them that the advantages of using a student in the lab, heavily discounted rate, and that facilitates partnerships with industry and potential internship sites. And if it seems like a good fit, then they sign the user facility agreement, they sign the IP agreement, and then they come in and start using the equipment. If it's looking like they're going to start using it quite often, you can even go a little further and set up a kind of a subcontract and give them even maybe more of a discounted rate if they kind of guarantee that they're going to be coming in to use the facility. And then after that, you invoice, and then they pay the invoice. So Christine's going to talk about the pricing structure and how we set that up.
Like Peter mentioned, we have a 3-tier fee structure, and as you can see here, it is categorized in industry, academic users, and North Seattle College students, with industry being the highest tier, which is pretty standard at user facilities. We give a discounted rate for academic, and this is, academic institutions outside, as well as faculty members, students outside of North Seattle College. And then with the lowest tier being the North Seattle College students, they don't pay to access the lab, and they don't pay for training. One thing that is specified, not on this, is that if they are doing work for the industry partner gets the discounted rate. So even if like industry partners, they can either hand it off to a student, or they could sit with the student and do the work with them, and they still get that discounted rate, which is a huge benefit for them and for us. Also, if there's like any projects that are going on in the school, research projects or class projects, we don't charge for that as well. So that's a huge benefit to training our students, as well as other students on North Seattle College. As a result, we've developed some strong partnerships with industry. This shows 6 of our industry partners, and out of these 6, 5 of them have used students, and almost solely use students unless the student wasn't available. What this does is this creates opportunities for that student, but also students that they're not directly working with, because they know the type of training and skill that the students have coming out of our program, so that they may hire an intern or even possibly an employee, coming out of our program. And actually, this past quarter, 2 internships were formed out of this collaboration, out of 2 of our industry partners, Lilo Tree and LabCorp Materials. And then just to show some numbers, we first adapted the user access model, or we just first formed the documentation in the last quarter of 2012. And these just show hours of non-nano student users. So this is not, them coming into class or doing projects or using the instruments. This is outside external users, industry users, students that are not part of the program. And so we really started forming the relationships at the end of 2014. You can see that the usage has gone up. The hours also include a possibility for you too, if you have this opportunity, is we offer a continuing education class for our SEM, and so that also brings in revenue and exposes people to nanoscience and the instruments.
How did you arrive at your pricing model? How did you arrive at those figures?
I wasn't here when it was first formed, so maybe Peter can speak to that, but basically we look at what is pretty common and around the user facilities, and we don't want to necessarily take away business, so we price it competitively with what is around there, and then take about like a 30% chunk off going from each tier on there. And what students really like is that they can come in and they can get the training on there. 2 to 4 hours of training is a lot of training. They can run the samples that they wanted to run anyways on there. So it's sometimes that's what they need to do for the bulk of their work. So that's really attractive to our students to come in and get that training. And as you can see here, the pie chart, it's broken down by the instruments we use. It's not all the instruments that we have, but by far the scanning electron microscope is used the most, especially because it has EDS capabilities, so they could do characterization of chemical characterization of their materials. Profilometer and the sputter coder, as well as are also the other 2 instruments that have brought in revenue. And then we also have, like I said, student projects that you have used a laser scanning confocal microscope, AFM, and laser cutter, and a 3D printer, but we don't charge for that. So those are things that have taken up hours hours in our user model. And Peter mentioned we wanted to talk about a case study that has benefited from this user model, Lilo Tree. One of the students, actually let me talk about Lilo Tree. Lilo Tree is located in Woodinville, Washington. We're in Seattle, so they're maybe about 30 minutes away from us in our greater area. They have about 20 employees in 3 different sites between their business and their wet lab. What they do kind of ranges. A lot of these small companies range from R&D to characterization, a lot of failure analysis. People will bring in projects, they want to know what went wrong, how could they make it better, and so they have to characterize or analyze what happened to their materials. And so they started using, I actually asked the chief scientists, like, how did you find out about us and why did you start coming here? We have a website, and they usually went to University of Washington user facility, but they weren't available. They couldn't book hours because it was heavily used, or the machine is down that they need. So they just went searching for sites. Our name popped up. They saw the fee structure. It worked really well, and that's what started the relationship. So if you are deciding to have a user facility, you do want to market that, and let people know that it's out there. And so yeah, they get, like I said, they get a heavily discounted rate. This particular partner almost solely uses a student to run the facility, so it's a really good benefit for them. They, unlike other user facilities, they may not talk to like the staff or the student, and it creates this scientific dialogue, and they also really enjoy that. They like hearing, what does the student have to offer? They don't have to offer up any information, but often our users do. They want to hear what the student is thinking. They want to hear another opinion of maybe what's going on. And so it's helped our user facility to increase hours, and it's helped increase opportunities for the student as well. So as a result, I mentioned that opportunities can evolve for other students. So when they first started, they had our lab assistant, our work study lab assistant, student lab assistant that was running all the samples. But what ended up happening is they hired another student that they hadn't worked with before for an internship, and that started in September. And our student, because he had been trained through our courses on the instrumentation that we offer, was able to run the SEM EDS analysis for the company for that scientist. And he started in spring, and then in the summer, after he finished the program, he was hired as an employee of that company. And so that technician, he's continued to use the lab, and also nanotechnology program completers, alumni, still get the discounted rate. So it's, we just keep feeding back into this loop. It's like to keep that relationship. So if you're an alumni of the program, you can still use that North Seattle College student tier. And then he didn't need any training. They didn't need to go to hire someone else. They may, some people have interns and then they don't hire them, and then they might hire another employee, but they don't have that specific training. Well, this student already had that, was familiar with the projects, knew what kind of materials that were going to be coming through, so it was a nice seamless transition from intern to employee. Okay, and Peter's going to talk about some other aspects. Oh, do you have a question?
Two questions. First off, you mentioned the student intern or the workers or work study student. You have work study students that you
Yes.
you have working in the lab at all times?
Not at all times. So the work study, because it's federal aid or state aid, they're limited to 19 hours a week. So often our students will work maybe an average of 10, maybe 8 to 12 hours a week. It goes around my schedule as well. But then what ends up happening is, as they have worked there longer, and even with this particular student that I'm talking about, this intern, when they have worked long enough, they can work unsupervised. So if I can't be there, they can go in there and they can run the samples, and it isn't like a staff member needs to be there with them. They completely run independent, and that has happened. We've had 2 work study students over the last year, after maybe a month of working, I'll just say, hey, are you available for this industry partner? They want to run a sample tomorrow. Okay, and they'll come in, they'll run samples. They'll do other things too. But yeah, we do use the work study, but they're limited to 19 hours a week. They're paid through financial aid.
One other question, I'll let you go there.
Sure.
What about consumables? Like in an AFM, you've got cantilevers and things like that that could be quite costly and specific to somebody's need.
Sure. If it is something that they can use, like SEM stubs and carbon, tape and things like that for the SEM, if they're like regular consumables, we usually provide that for that type of equipment. AFM, like the stubs or the discs, we usually provide that. If it's a particular cantilever that we don't already have on there, then they need to supply those materials if they're like specialty materials. But if it's something that we have and that we use, we use that, and a lot of our consumables is paid through laboratory fees too, through the students, and so we usually have a supply of that, and through the grant as well for other things. But yeah, we've had a user that needed something special for the sputter coater, so they purchased that. That's usually what happens.
So Christine was highlighting student success based on the user facility model, but it's also been a success for our center. This particular company, Lilo Tree, is now one of Shine's strongest industry partners. They now sit on Shine's industry advisory board. We have quarterly meetings, and Lilo Tree presented at one of those meetings. This company also came to the 2015 Micro Nanotechnology Conference that we hosted and sat on an industry panel. And Lilo Tree is working with another student intern, and we will expect probably next year they will take another. And in addition, Lilo Tree will be writing a letter of commitment when Shine writes their next grant proposal. All of these have been a result of the user access model and the user access facility. So we want to continue working on the user facility and continue to develop it, and Christine's going to talk about some things we have coming up in the future.
So recently, and what's not on our fee structure, some of the paperwork that you received on there are 3 new tools that we added. One is a analytical probe station, a dynamic light scattering instrument to measure nanoparticle size, and a carbon coater. These instruments were in part chosen because of our industry partners. Like we said, we have a relationship where we ask what tools are used, what should students be trained on, and they gave us insight into purchasing these next pieces of equipment. So we do see that as soon as we get them in our fee structure, these instruments will be used as well, because they're often not something, because they're specialty equipment that a smaller company will buy. And we also anticipate to attract new users, because outside of our industry partners, we had Shine probe a couple of companies that we don't currently work with and ask, will you use this? Is this something that is something that you want students to be trained on and that you would like to use? So we anticipate that it will attract new users as well. Like I said, most of the time students are running the instrument, and we don't see that changing. We've heard from a couple of our industry partners, it's extremely attractive. It benefits them. I didn't put the numbers on there, but I had numbers out of 70 times our instrument was accessed, 55 of those times students ran the instruments, and then the cases that they couldn't, it was either a staff member that ran it or they came in and ran quick samples, but the bulk of the time is the student. This also adds sustainability to our center, because it brings an income, whether it's paying for the consumables or providing opportunities to our students in forms of scholarships or paid internships if we decide to take interns into our lab. And then in the future, we really hope that other technical or other technician education programs will be able to develop this model. One thing that Peter stressed is you probably have equipment Maybe it's only one piece of equipment, maybe it's two, but you can start using that. You don't need an extensive lab. It's probably underutilized. If you have even something like GCMS, it's probably underutilized because you only run it for your OChem labs or something. This is something that maybe an industry partner wants to use, especially if they're a small company. So you can start adopting this now, like sooner than later. You don't have to buy pieces of equipment to adopt this model. And then this is just our webpage that shows the instruments that we have on there. You can access our seattlenano.org and get more information as well as all the documents that we gave to you and what we can offer. Aside from that, do you guys have any questions? We let if it is something where they want to run, or a student is going to run, we let them know up front, this is the schedule for the quarter. These are the regular hours, because as you know, things kind of change, and this is when the student will be working. We, if it's a work study lab assistant, we let them know what that's going to be for the quarter. And when we hire a student, we stress that this is a relationship that's very important. You need to understand, if you commit to saying you're going to run the samples, then do not cancel. And then we've never had problems with that, but it could be where we're not going to hire you on for the next quarter, or we need to let you go, because this relationship is important, not just for us, but for future students' opportunities. Was there a second question? Sorry. Okay. And then,
in 5 years, this piece of equipment is going to be out of date. There's going to be some new, fancy new equipment coming up. So what is your plan to sustain the technology?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's an excellent question. The question is, in the next 5 years, new tools will be developed, and how are we going to sustain our lab to be current? Well, one of the ways is to continue to develop our industry partnerships and to continue to get input regarding which instruments will future technicians use. An example is we're currently working with a consortia of 10 different companies, as well as the city and the county, to possibly purchase an FTIR microscope. So that piece of equipment will be funded partially by a consortia of companies. In addition, there are some core tools, even in nanotechnology, that have been used for quite a while, like scanning electron microscopy or surface contact profilometry. And those are sort of standard tools that we expect in the next 5 years will continue to be used. And in the future, we also don't definitely know what's going to happen, and we may develop and change the user access model accordingly, either the fee structure or the length of the contracts or the pieces of available equipment. All of that could be changed based on the results in the next 5 years.
Any pushback from business office or anything of that nature related to industries out there, any products and service?
That's a really good question. So the question was, is there any pushback from the business office or industry regarding competing with a current business? So before we set up the user facility model, I did a scan of the region to make sure that we weren't competing with any other local companies. And the pieces of equipment that we offer for user access are strategically placed to fill holes in the sort of local metrology industry, if you will. So that was something that was important in the beginning, was to make sure that we weren't competing with other existing companies. An example is that our scanning electron microscope is a tungsten thermomic emission microscope, and the magnification level that it can get down to is only about 50,000 times, which sounds like a lot, but it actually isn't very much. There's a local company as well as the University of Washington that have field emission scanning electron microscopes that can magnify to around 1 million times. So we don't see that as a competing technology. But often a company doesn't need that much magnification. They need to do a quick run, and UW's instrument is usually booked constantly throughout the week, as well as often overnight and on the weekends.
I know that you have remote access. How's that working out for you?
So far, remote access is working great. We haven't done remote access with a company yet, but it is in the pipeline, and it is certainly a possibility that a company could mail us or send us samples, and that company or an intern at that company could run the instrument remotely through an internet connection and collect data. So far, remote access has been done with community college and high school classrooms. But we're very open to doing remote work with industry partners that aren't able to physically come into the lab.
So do you have maintenance contracts on these pieces of equipment, and if you do, how are those funded?
That's an excellent question. Do we have maintenance contracts on any of the pieces of equipment? The answer to that is no. We do not have any yearly maintenance contracts on the equipment. The approximate amount for the scanning electron microscope maintenance contract is about $35,000. We did do some fairly substantial maintenance on the SEM this fiscal year, and the total came to less than half of that yearly service contract. So based on those results, we don't plan on purchasing service contracts for the rest of the instruments, and we'll just do repairs and replacements as needed. So my question for the audience is, do any of you guys have pieces of equipment that are underutilized that you think that you could adopt this model for? What piece of equipment do you have?
They aren't getting utilized.
Mm-hmm.
So this model seems very building actually.
Mm-hmm. How about the gentleman behind you?
We have an equipment access program that's kind of sorry, it's kind of
Mm-hmm.
I'm from Wisconsin. The other technology
Okay. Mm-hmm. So you're currently having an SEM and a cleaner.
We're in kind of a small area, about 100,000 people in our local area. So
Mm-hmm.
it'd be interesting to see how we can maybe generate more interest.
Mm-hmm. Anyone else? Do you guys have any pieces of equipment that are specialized? What do you use?
SEM,
Uh-huh.
AFM,
Hmm. And are you considering adopting a facility model where companies could use it by the hour?
Yeah. We do some remote access as well, so that's why I was
Mhm.
interested in that.
Mm-hmm.
It's a really good model for getting that collaboration with local industries.
Mm-hmm. And as Christine sort of alluded to, our pricing structure is set up to have student industry collaboration and center industry collaboration. That's our main driver. Bringing in revenue isn't the main purpose of the current pricing structure. That may change in the future, but those were our two main goals in setting up this program. Any other questions?
Have you had any negatives that you can see that have happened that you weren't expecting before?
That's a very good question. I would say that something we learned was that intellectual property was extremely important. I wouldn't say that it was a negative, but it wasn't something that initially was part of the user facility model. But as soon as we learned that was important to the companies, we jumped on it. We set it into a separate document, set that onto our legal team, had it reviewed by the current industry users. So that's an example of something that we didn't initially think was important and now incorporate.
Also, not really a negative, because like I said, our industry partners are pretty adaptable. They know like we're figuring some things out, but we recently noticed that maybe one of our fee structure or like one of our pricing doesn't really make sense, you know, for what they were doing. And so we talked to a couple of the partners going out and then looked at other fee structures that use the instrument going, well, maybe we need to modify for certain instances this instrument on how it's structured, and they're fine. And, you know, we will, you know, adopt that. Like we adopted it immediately, and we're going to change that in our fee structure formally in the next like quarterly session. But yeah, so it's nice because we get feedback, and we're receptive to that feedback, and we make those changes, especially if, you know, they make sense, and so they don't really give us a lot of pushback. You know, they're really receptive.
You take one more question.
Have we ever had anybody not pay?
Not yet.
Not yet. We've formed pretty good personal relationships with the industry partners who come into the lab. And I think basically because of that, we maintain good accountability. Also, knowing that the student will be there and that Christine will be there adds to the credibility of our program. So no, that hasn't been a problem.
If anything, they ask, did you get the last payment? Did you get? I mean, they emphasize, I just want to make sure you guys got your payment. So if anything, they're more concerned that they didn't pay than not paying.
Any issue with like the liability clause? Sometimes that can be a real hang up for people, even for silly things like coming on campus. So how do you deal with that? I mean, obviously lawyers people all that.
We haven't yet had a liability complaint, but as part of the user facility agreement, liability is part of that. But I think my wife works in the medical industry, and typically liability claims are often linked to interpersonal issues and not necessarily just when people get hurt. So we want to maintain very, very good relationships, and if somebody, you know, cuts themselves slightly doing sample prep, I don't expect that would instantly be a problem, but legally it is in the documentation, and that's dealt with.
I've seen in the past for silly things like even food contracts, they want to argue liability issues.
I don't know if I should, because we did that.
So we'll be around after this session. We'd be pleased to talk with anyone more. And we handed out the documentation, but if anybody didn't get any documentation, please come up and we'll show you our 3 forms. Thank you very much.